I tasted the salt of my own tears mixing with the metallic tang of blood. The stone floor was cold and unforgiving beneath my cheek. No one was meant to see an Omega servant on her knees, especially not here, in the gilded halls of the Shadowfang Palace. But this wasn't about status anymore. This was about survival. My mother, Naomi, always warned me, "Keep your head down, Audrey. You are nothing but dust in this royal court. Be grateful for the service and never, ever draw the king's eye." I had failed, catastrophically. A wave of heat rolled off the massive figure standing over me, forcing a whimper from my throat. It wasn't the warmth of a hearth. It was the suffocating, terrifying heat of a predator. He smelled of pine, ice, and pure, raw power. Even the air around him felt thin, difficult to breathe. "Look at me, girl." The voice was not a request. It was a command that burrowed into my spine and pulled me upright. It was low, a deep rumble that could shatter glass or command armies. It was the sound of the world's most powerful wolf, King Leo, the ruler of all shifters in the north, and the man whose eyes held a chilling emptiness that had earned him the title of the Alpha King. I forced my chin up, my own eyes blurring with fear and pain. Lady Myra's whipping hand had left a vicious welt across my shoulder just moments ago, and the sting was a dull roar compared to the icy dread freezing my blood. The king was a legend of muscle and shadow, his suit of state obsidian black, his expression a mask of cold fury. His hair was midnight black, slicked back from a face that was devastatingly handsome but utterly devoid of warmth. I had seen him many times from afar, an untouchable god on his throne, but up close, the sheer magnitude of his authority pressed down on me like a physical weight. "You," he began, his tone flat, emotionless, "have been accused of trespassing in the West Wing, a private sector reserved for the High Council, and..." He paused, the silence stretching into an eternity, "of attempting to steal private documents." "No, Your Majesty!" The words tumbled out, desperate and broken. "It's a lie. I was in the library delivering books to Lady Myra's chamber, as instructed. I tripped. I didn't know the door to the West Wing was open, and I certainly didn't..." Slap. The sound cracked like a whip in the silent hall. My head snapped to the side. It wasn't the king. It was Lady Myra, standing slightly behind his left shoulder, a smug, viperous smile playing on her beautiful, cruel face. She was a high beta, dressed in silks and dripping in entitlement, and her hatred for me, a lowly Omega servant, was palpable. "Silence, filth!" Myra hissed, her voice a poisonous whisper. "Do not insult the king with your pathetic excuses. We all know what Omegas like you are after. A better life, a chance to snag an alpha. You think because you polish silver for the council, you deserve a peek at the future of the pack?" I hugged myself, trying to shield the truth I felt aching beneath my skin, the truth of the crescent moon birthmark that lay hidden beneath the collar of my tunic, a mark my mother always called a curse. It had been the reason we fled our former home, the reason we lived on the lowest rungs of this royal hierarchy. King Leo finally stepped forward. He didn't rush. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, and lethal. He stopped directly in front of me, forcing my gaze to the rigid line of his jaw. "I find the evidence circumstantial," he stated. His eyes, a startling glacial blue, searching mine. They held no pity, only assessment. He was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved, or perhaps a weed to be pulled. Myra immediately protested, her voice laced with outrage. "Leo, are you doubting my word? I saw her. She was lurking. She belongs in the dungeons, or better yet, banished." The king raised a hand, and Myra instantly clamped her mouth shut, her fury warring with her absolute obedience to him. Leo's eyes returned to me. I could feel my own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to fly. He smelled closer now, overwhelming. My wolf, my small, skittish, usually silent Omega wolf, was whining deep in my mind, a terrifying mix of fear and something else, something primal and shocking. He reached out a single gloved hand and my breath hitched. I flinched, Ian expecting another blow. Instead, his fingers brushed the ragged collar of my servant's tunic. "You are Audrey," he stated, his thumb resting lightly on the delicate skin of my neck. Yes, Your Majesty," I stammered, my voice barely a squeak. His gaze dropped to the small dark mark just at the edge of my clavicle. A mark that always looked like a faint bruise but was, in fact, the tip of my forbidden birthmark. He stared at it for a long, quiet moment. The energy in the room shifted, turning from cold rage to a terrifying, electric anticipation. Then his eyes snapped back to mine, and the glacial blue was suddenly darkened, molten with an emotion I couldn't comprehend. It looked like hunger. "A servant," he repeated, testing the word. I swallowed hard, pushing back the fear, the pain, the strange, sickening pull toward his power. "Yes, Your Majesty, I'm just a servant." His head tilted, a barely perceptible movement that somehow felt monstrous. The tension coiled tight in the air, wrapping around us. He leaned down, his mouth inches from my ear, and his low growl vibrated through my entire body, a sound that bypassed my mind and went straight to my Omega core. "Then," King Leo rasped, his breath warm and dangerous against my skin, "serve in my bed." The sheer audacity of the command, the blatant disregard for the law that forbade a servant from even touching an alpha's private quarters, let alone his bed, stole my breath. It was a direct order, a terrifying, beautiful, and utterly inescapable prison sentence. I was a common servant, and he was the Alpha King. He could demand anything. My knees buckled. I couldn't breathe. Myra let out a strangled, furious gasp behind him. But Leo ignored her completely. His eyes were locked on mine, waiting for my answer. It wasn't a choice. It was a fate. "Yes, Your Majesty," I whispered, tears finally tracing a path down my face. "As you command." The world was not silent when the Alpha King issued his decree, but to me, every sound outside the frantic drumming of my own heart had been muffled, pushed to the edges of existence. Lady Myra's immediate choked protest had been the loudest noise, a shrill, outraged sound that Leo silenced with a single contemptuous glance over his shoulder. He hadn't needed to speak a word. The power in his posture alone was a dismissal. He was the king, and his word was the only law that mattered in the Shadowfang Palace. Once my whispered agreement, my absolute surrender, left my lips, the strange, coiled tension that had held the air hostage slowly began to unwind. Leo straightened, the molten darkness in his eyes receding slightly, replaced by that terrifying, cold assessment. It was as if he'd finished an arduous calculation and was now merely waiting for the result. "Take her," he commanded, the words directed to a massive, dark-furred beta guard who had materialized from the shadows near the entrance. The guard, whose name I vaguely recalled as Gideon, wore the royal insignia on his uniform and moved with the heavy, disciplined grace of a loyal soldier. Gideon didn't look at me with lust or pity, just professional obedience. To him, I was merely another piece of royal property being moved to a designated location. As Gideon approached, his sheer size dwarfing my slight frame, I felt Myra's eyes burning holes in my back. I didn't dare turn to look at her, but I could feel the hatred radiating from her, a promise of future retribution far more terrifying than the king's own cold command. Her dream of becoming Luna, of being the woman who finally melted the ice surrounding the Alpha King's heart, had just been obliterated by a single, casual word directed at an insignificant Omega. Her fury was a storm Myra behind. The transition was abrupt, a violent lurch from the light of the public hall into the hushed, winding corridors of the private wing. My mind was a chaotic mess of disbelief and panic. Serve in his bed. What did that even mean for an alpha king? Did he mean a single night of pleasure? Temporary distraction, or was this a decree of long-term servitude? The words echoed in the hollow space of my terror. I was an omega, a cleaner, a scullery maid, a book organizer. My only skill was invisibility. Now I was destined for the very epicenter of the Alpha King's power, his private chambers, a place forbidden to anyone without royal blood or at least high beta lineage. Where are we going? I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Gideon didn't pause his steady march. The royal consort suite, Audrey. His Majesty's private wing. Consort. The word punched the breath out of me. It was a title. One step below Luna, but for a servant, it was an impossible, dangerous elevation. It meant I wouldn't just be a one-night dalliance. I would be a permanent fixture, forced into permanent proximity with the most dangerous, emotionally unavailable male in the north. This was not a reprieve from exile. This was a gilded cage. We climbed a massive, winding marble staircase that I had only ever been permitted to polish, never to ascend. The stairs led to a corridor cloaked in velvet silence, lined with doors of dark, rich wood. Gideon stopped before the largest door at the end of the hall, the one I knew led to the king's personal sanctuary. He released my arm, his face impassive. His Majesty will see you after his High Council meeting. A bath has been prepared. Everything you require is inside. But my uniform, I mumbled, gesturing to my torn, dusty servant's tunic. Gideon almost smiled, a small, weary twist of his lips. You will no longer require it, Audrey. Consider your old life finished. The king has commanded it. With that, he gave a curt nod, opened the massive door, and gently pushed me inside. Then, the heavy oak closed with a soft, definitive click that sounded like the finality of a prison door locking. The suite was breathtaking and overwhelming. It was opulent yet minimalist, a reflection of the king himself. The air was thick with his scent, stronger and more intoxicating in this private space, that mix of sharp pine and cold mountain air. The room was dominated by a colossal bed draped in black silk, but my eyes were drawn to the enormous curtained window that looked out over the sprawling, icy Shadowfang Mountains. It was a beautiful, savage view, a perfect metaphor for the man who owned it. A small, efficient woman with gentle eyes and a silver tunic, clearly a personal attendant, immediately approached me. She introduced herself as Clara. Clara had none of the palace's usual icy formality. She looked at me with a mix of genuine pity and quiet understanding. "Come, dear," Clara murmured, her voice soft. "Let's get you cleaned up. The bath is drawn, and you are exhausted." She led me to a bathroom larger than my entire old living quarters. The marble tub was already filled with steaming water, scented with soothing lavender. As Clara helped me unlace the rough, painful strings of my tunic, she caught sight of the red welt on my shoulder. "Lady Myra's cruelty has no limits," Clara sighed, her expression grim. She gently applied a cooling salve to the injury. "She is beside herself with rage, you know. She has spent 10 years maneuvering for this position, and the king gave it to a newcomer, an Omega at that. She will not forgive you." "I don't understand," I whispered, sinking into the blessed heat of the water. The scent of lavender did little to drown out the oppressive smell of the king, which clung to the linen towels and the very steam in the air. Why me? He could have chosen any of the high betas, any beautiful, powerful female in the kingdom. Why a servant? Why the forbidden choice? Clara wrung out a cloth, her gaze distant. "The king is cursed, Audrey. Everyone knows the rumours. He has not taken a Luna or even a true consort in a century." They say his wolf is dead, or perhaps something worse. He is the coldest alpha in history. His choice of you is a puzzle, but maybe he simply wanted to prove a point, to remind everyone that his authority is absolute and his rules apply to everyone but him. To prove a point. I was a pawn, a symbol of his ruthless power, nothing more. The thought was a chilling comfort compared to the terrifying idea that he had chosen me for any personal reason. Clara left me to bathe, promising to return with dinner. Alone in the enormous space, I finally allowed myself to look at the crescent moon birthmark, my curse, my secret, my mother's shame. It was located just beneath my left shoulder blade, a silver-white marking that pulsed faintly beneath my skin when my emotions ran high. It had always been hidden, always a source of fear. As I dried myself, I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror. I wasn't beautiful in the haughty, sharp-edged way of the betas. I was small, slight, with quiet brown eyes and the hair the colour of sun-faded wheat. I was utterly unremarkable. Yet the king had commanded me. Clara returned with a simple but elegant meal, soup, fresh bread and fruit, and laid out a nightgown of soft, pale silver silk. It was so unlike the rough linen I was used to that the feel of it against my skin was a foreign luxury. "Eat, dear," Clara urged, "and try to rest. You'll need your strength." I knew what she meant. I was waiting for the king. I ate mechanically, the food tasteless, and sat on the edge of the enormous bed, listening to the silence. The king's scent was everywhere, pulling at my nervous Omega wolf, a heady, dangerous cocktail of fear and fascination. It was a suffocating feeling, an overwhelming sense of being claimed long before he had even touched me. An hour passed. Then two. The oil lamps were extinguished, leaving only the silver light of the moon filtering in from the massive window. I was frozen in place, listening to every creak of the old palace, waiting for the sound of the door, the heavy, deliberate tread of his boots. And then I heard it. A faint but unmistakable click in the hallway, followed by the soft, deep thump of the door being closed. I tensed, my whole body rigid beneath the silk nightgown. The door to the bedroom opened. King Leo stood in the doorway. He was no longer in his formal suit. He wore only simple black trousers, the fit emphasizing the brutal carved muscle of his torso. His skin was bronze, crisscrossed with faint silver scars that told stories of battles I could only imagine. His midnight hair was slightly damp, as if he had showered. He looked less like a king and more like a warrior god stepping off the mountain, utterly raw and powerful. His eyes, those terrifying glacial blue eyes, swept over the room and landed on me. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just walked into the room, his stride slow and heavy, until he was standing just a foot away from the bed. My heart was beating so hard it hurt my ears. I felt faint. He reached out a hand and I flinched, an automatic, desperate movement. His hand paused, mid-air, his jaw clenched, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something in his eyes that wasn't coldness, it was annoyance. "Don't flinch," he commanded, his voice a low, rough growl that barely reached my ears. "I have not touched you." "Forgive me, Your Majesty," I whispered, bowing my head. He let out a sharp, frustrated breath, an almost human sound that surprised me. He didn't drop his hand. Instead, he reached past me to the headboard and lifted something heavy and silver. It was a single, long-stemmed white rose, placed there by Clara. He held it up, inspecting it. "You believe Myra's lies, then?" he stated, his voice devoid of question. "The evidence seemed to be against me, Your Majesty," I replied, choosing my words with the utmost care. "And I do not challenge the judgment of the king." He tossed the rose onto the bed, where it landed with a soft, irrelevant thump. He finally looked down at me, and his eyes were piercing. "You are not here for punishment, Audrey," Leo said, his voice dropping, taking on a new, deep, resonant quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. Punishment would be exile. I would not waste my time on a servant's petty crime. You are here because I commanded you, and when I command, I expect absolute, unquestioning service. He lifted his hand again, and this time he didn't stop. His fingers closed around the pale silver silk of my nightgown, just beneath my collarbone. He pulled gently, exposing the edge of the crescent moon birthmark on my skin. He stared at it. His gaze was intense, focused, as if he were trying to read a secret code written only for him. "This mark," he muttered, his voice a strange mix of rough steel and silk. "I know it. I have seen it before. Tell me, Audrey, what are you?" The question was the real hook, the true danger. He wasn't asking about my servant status. He was asking about my lineage, my hidden history, the thing my mother had died to protect. My heart hammered with the agonizing knowledge that answering truthfully could lead to immediate banishment. Or worse, lying to the Alpha King was unthinkable. I don't know, Your Majesty," I admitted, my voice trembling with the effort of not breaking down. "My mother never told me. She only said it was a curse." Leo's thumb, rough and warm, traced the silver outline of the mark. A shock, like a lightning strike, shot through me, deep into my core. My wolf let out a sharp, silent cry of recognition and yearning. It was instant, powerful, and utterly terrifying. He felt it too. I saw the sudden, violent widening of his eyes, the rapid clench of his jaw, the hard, sharp intake of his breath. The coldness shattered, and for a fleeting, terrifying second, I saw pure, raw alpha need, a flash of predatory intensity that was focused solely on me. His muscles went rigid, and the veins in his neck stood out. He leaned in close, his scent overwhelming me, making me dizzy with the sudden rush of my own panicked, yet responsive omega hormones. "A curse," he breathed, the word a husky promise of danger. He dropped his gaze to my mouth. "Then let me be cursed with you." He was inches away. The tension between us was a physical, screaming thing. I was trapped, terrified, and against every rational thought. I felt the sickening, intoxicating pull of the mate bond, forbidden, dangerous, and undeniable. The king was not cold. He was a raging fire barely contained, and I was the kindling. I waited, eyes wide, for the kiss, for the claiming, for the inevitable descent into my new, horrifying reality. He held the silence for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a visible, violent effort, Leo pulled back. He took a single, controlled step away. His face was once again a mask, but the glacial blue eyes were still dark and burning. "Sleep, Audrey," he commanded, his voice hoarse, ragged. "We will speak of service in the morning, and you will not flinch again." With that final confusing order, he turned and strode out of the room through a second private door I hadn't noticed, leaving me alone in the silent, king-scented chamber, trembling with the aftershocks of a confrontation that had ended before it truly began. The air was heavy with the ghost of a touch and the terrible, magnetic tension of a forbidden mate bond he was desperately trying to ignore. My heart was not yet free. I was still a prisoner, and the king's silence was more terrifying than his growl. Thank you so much for tuning in to Stream of Stories. If you're captivated by Audrey's story so far, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turning on the notification bell helps a small channel like mine grow. Also, I'd love to hear from you. Comment below and tell me where you are watching from and how the weather is today. Let's build our pack.